He slammed the folder onto the table so hard that the coffee cup tipped sideways and poured across the document she had spent 3 weeks preparing. Park Elijah did not apologize. He did not even look at the spreading stain. He looked at Amara, at her face, at her swollen belly straining against the fabric of her coat. And he smiled. The kind of smile that had nothing to do with happiness. "You thought you could just disappear," he said. "You thought you could take what belongs to me and just walk away." Amara pressed her back against the wall of the clinic hallway. Her heart was slamming against her ribs. 8 months. She had survived 8 months without him finding her. And now here he was, standing 10 feet away, and the one thing she could not do, the one thing her body would not allow, was run. She was 34 weeks pregnant. Running was no longer something she could do. That moment, that specific, particular moment with the coffee still dripping off the edge of the table and Elijah's smile cutting across the silence, was the moment Amara Bennett understood that no distance was ever truly enough. You could move to another city, you could change your phone number, you could build something small and careful and entirely your own, and it would still not be enough if the wrong person decided they wanted to find you. She had been hiding for 6 months. She had thought she was safe. She had been wrong. Before we go any further, if this kind of story hits you somewhere real, if it stays with you the way the best stories do, subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell. Because every week we bring you stories exactly like this one, layered, human, unfinished in all the ways real life is unfinished. And while you watch, drop a comment below. Tell me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Amara Bennett had come to Seoul because it was the last place anyone would look for a Black American woman with a nursing credential and a determination to start over. She had picked it the way you pick a destination on a map when you don't care where you go, only that you go, with a finger and a closed eye and whatever luck was left. That had been 2 years ago. She had arrived with 2 suitcases and an intermediate Korean vocabulary she had built over 6 months of YouTube lessons and a second-hand textbook. She had found a hospital placement, then a small apartment in Mapogu, then a routine, a real one. Coffee from the cart on the corner, the 8:15 subway, 12-hour shifts in pediatric intake, where she could sometimes forget, for a few hours, what she had come from. She had met Kang Min-Jae at a private fundraiser attached to the hospital. She hadn't known who he was. That was the honest truth of it, and it mattered, because people always assumed she must have known, must have done it deliberately, must have walked into the lion's mouth with full understanding of the teeth. She hadn't known. He had been standing near the window when she arrived, and he was the kind of man who stood near windows because rooms felt too small for him. I was wearing a dark suit that looked like it had been designed specifically for his proportions. He was not particularly tall. He was not classically handsome in any way she could easily describe, but he had a quality of stillness that drew the eye, like a pressure system, like the moment before weather changed. He had noticed her noticing him. He had crossed the room. He had said something dry and slightly self-deprecating about the canapes, which were terrible, and she had laughed without meaning to, and it had started from there. Within 8 months they were married. She had known by then what he was. He had not hidden it exactly, but he had introduced it slowly, in pieces, the way you might let a person adjust to cold water rather than pushing them in. His organization. His reach. The men who appeared and disappeared at a gesture. The calls he took at 2 in the morning and never explained afterward. She had asked once. He had told her he dealt in influence. She had understood that meant something darker. She had stayed anyway. That was the part Amara did not like to examine too closely. The part where she had seen it and stayed. She told herself it was love. That was true. But it was also that she had been alone for a long time before Min-Jae, and his certainty, the way he moved through the world as though the world had already agreed to accommodate him, had felt like safety. That was the mistake. Confusing certainty for safety. Confusing control for care. The marriage had lasted 18 months before she understood the difference. It was not one moment. That was the thing nobody believed when she tried to explain it later. It was not one terrible night, one dramatic confrontation, one revelation that cracked everything open. It was 100 small moments. The way he rerouted her hospital schedule without asking. The way her apartment became a place his security team monitored. The way her friendship slowly disappeared. Not through threats, not through anything she could point to, but through a kind of gravitational attrition, where the people in her life drifted away because being close to her required navigating his orbit. The morning she left, she had packed a single bag. She had written him a note, then torn it up, because everything she wrote sounded like either an accusation or an apology, and she didn't want to give him either. She had slipped out at 5 in the morning while his security detail changed shifts. She had taken a cab to a neighborhood far from their district and sat in a convenience store for 2 hours, waiting to see if anyone followed. No one had. She had found a new apartment by noon. She had applied for a transfer at work. She had started building the small, careful life. 2 weeks later, she had taken a pregnancy test in the bathroom of her new apartment with the faucet running to cover the sound of her own breathing. 2 lines. She had sat on the floor of that bathroom for 45 minutes. Not crying, not panicking, just sitting, recalibrating, the way you recalibrate after the ground shifts under your feet, and you need a moment to understand what is still solid. She decided not to tell him. She had examined that decision from every angle, and she came back to the same place every time. Telling him meant re-entering his orbit. It meant negotiating access and custody and safety with a man whose idea of protection was total control. She was not willing to put a child inside that structure. She was not willing to raise a daughter. She knew somehow, from early on, that it was a daughter. Inside a gilded cage, watching her mother try to breathe inside it. So she hadn't told him. She had transferred her care to a private clinic in Gangnam, far from any facility his organization was known to support. She had paid in cash whenever she could. She had told her colleagues she was raising the child alone, which was true, and that the father was not in the picture, which was complicated. She had managed. Barely, sometimes. Her feet swelled until her work shoes became unwearable, and she borrowed a pair from a coworker who was 3 sizes larger and didn't ask questions. She slept poorly. She ate what she could afford, which was less than she needed. She worked until her back ached constantly, which was until about 7 months, when her department head had sat across from her with that careful professional expression and told her she needed to begin her leave. She had known, walking into the clinic at 34 weeks for her scheduled appointment, that she was tired in a way sleep didn't fix anymore. The kind of tired that had weight to it. But she was also, underneath the exhaustion, holding something that felt like pride. She had done this. She had built this, a life for herself and her daughter, without anyone's help, without anyone's permission. She had walked into the waiting room that morning with her medical file and her reusable water bottle and the pair of borrowed sneakers, and she had sat down in a chair near the window and begun filling out a form. She had not looked up when the door opened. She never saw it coming. Amara. She knew the voice before she raised her head. The specific timbre of it. The way it flattened her name into something that was not quite a question and not quite a command, but occupied the space between them. She had heard that voice every day for 18 months. She had spent 6 months trying to forget it. She looked up. Kang Min-Jae was standing in the doorway of the clinic waiting room in a dark overcoat, flanked by 2 men she recognized from his organization. His eyes moved from her face to her belly and then back to her face in a single controlled sweep. He was very still. He was never still like this. He was always moving, always in motion. Even in repose, there was some quality of forward momentum to him. But he was still now, the kind of still that meant something was happening inside him that had no visible outlet yet. The waiting room had 4 other patients. All of them had looked up. The receptionist had looked up. The kind of men Min-Jae traveled with had a quality that altered the atmosphere of rooms. Amara did not stand. Her body would not allow it quickly enough, and she refused to struggle to her feet in front of him. She stayed seated. She held the pen she'd been using to fill out the form. Her grip on it was very tight. "Min-Jae," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. He walked across the waiting room. He did not sit across from her. He sat down in the empty chair directly beside her, which forced her to turn her head sideways to look at him, which was likely deliberate. He was close enough that she could have rested her hand on his arm without reaching. He did not look at her. He was looking at the form in her lap, at the date of birth field she had filled in, then at the due date column visible at the top of the sheet. "How far along?" he said. It was not phrased as a question. "That isn't something I'm required to tell you." He turned his head and looked at her directly. Up close, in the clinic lighting, she could see things she hadn't expected. He looked tired, not the polished, pressured kind of tired she had seen on him during difficult negotiations, when he'd been awake for 30 hours managing something she was never fully told about. This was different. This was the kind of tired that settled in the face slowly over months, the kind that came from something internal. Amara. His voice was very quiet. Tell me how far along. 34 weeks, she said, because lying about it in front of a medical file was pointless. He absorbed that. She watched him do the arithmetic. 18 months of marriage, 6 months since she'd left. The numbers resolved into something unmistakable. He did not say anything for a long time. The receptionist had returned to her computer. The other patients had returned, slowly, to their phones and magazines. One of Min-Jae's men had stationed himself near the door. The other had disappeared, presumably outside. You were going to raise her alone, Min-Jae said finally. Amara's throat tightened. You don't know it's a girl. I know, he said. She looked at him. He was not looking at her anymore. He was looking at his own hands, which were resting on his knees. Those hands? She knew them. She had watched those hands sign documents that moved money across continents, and she had watched those same hands pull a loose thread from her jacket one evening without saying anything, just quietly fixing it. She had thought about that detail too often in the last 6 months. I was going to raise her alone, Amara said. Yes, because you were afraid of me. She considered that. It was not the full answer, but it was not wrong either. Because I was afraid of what life with you would mean for her. There's a difference. He did not argue with that. She had expected him to argue. He was a man who almost always responded to resistance with counter-pressure. But he sat there, very quietly, and he did not argue. I didn't know, he said. I know you didn't know. That was the point. Amara. Don't. Her voice came out sharper than she intended, and she heard it, heard the edge in it, and modulated. She was not going to have a scene in this waiting room. Don't say whatever you're about to say. I had reasons. They were real reasons. I don't owe you an apology for protecting my daughter. He turned to look at her then, and his expression was something she didn't have a word for. It was not anger. It was not the cold, controlled effect he deployed in professional contexts. It was something rawer than either of those things. Something that looked uncomfortably close to pain. I'm not asking for an apology, he said. She held his gaze. She did not look away. She had learned, in their marriage, that looking away from Min-Jae was a concession he always noticed and never forgot. Then what are you asking for? He was quiet for a long moment. Outside the window, Seoul moved in its usual relentless rhythm. Taxis and pedestrians and the gray November light pressing against the glass. I don't know yet, he said. It was the most honest thing she had ever heard him say. She looked back down at her form. Her hands were not entirely steady. She finished the date of birth field and moved to the next line. Min-Jae sat beside her in silence, and he did not leave, and neither of them said anything else until the nurse called her name. When Amara stood, her body slow and graceless with the weight of 34 weeks, she felt him move behind her. Not touching, not reaching, just present, in the particular way he had always been present, like a thing that redirected gravity. She walked toward the corridor. She did not tell him to go. She did not tell him to stay. She did not know, in that moment, what she wanted. And that uncertainty, that small, terrifying crack in her certainty, was the most dangerous thing that had happened to her all morning. More dangerous than being found. More dangerous than him sitting beside her in that chair. She had spent 6 months knowing exactly what she wanted. Now she was not sure. The nurse's name was Park Ji-young, and she had the particular professional warmth of someone who had learned to read a room before entering it. She looked at Amara and then, briefly, at the man who had stood when Amara stood and was now clearly deciding whether to follow, and she said nothing about any of it. She simply held the door open and said, "Right this way, Ms. Bennett," in careful English, and Amara walked through it. Min-Jae did not follow. That surprised her. She had expected him to follow. I was a man who did not accept closed doors. Not literally, not in any sense. And she had braced herself for the moment when he would simply come through it anyway, flanked by whoever he'd brought, and there would be a scene in the examination corridor that she would have to manage on top of everything else. But he stayed in the waiting room. She heard, just before the door clicked shut behind her, the sound of him sitting back down. The appointment took 40 minutes. The midwife was thorough, unhurried, the kind of practitioner who gave weight to silence and did not fill it unnecessarily. Amara lay on the table and stared at the ceiling and tried to keep her breathing even while the measurements were taken and the heartbeat was found, strong, rhythmic, indifferent to the chaos occurring outside these walls. And the midwife said everything was progressing normally and asked if Amara had anyone at home helping with the final weeks. "I'm managing," Amara said. The midwife wrote something in the chart. She did not press. When Amara came back out to the waiting room, Min-Jae was still there. He had not moved to the far side of the room, or paced, or done anything that would have signaled agitation. I was sitting exactly where she'd left him, coat still on, hands still resting on his knees, and he was looking at the door she came through the way a man looks at something he has spent 40 minutes deciding what to do about. His two men were no longer visible inside the waiting room. She caught a shadow behind the frosted glass of the clinic's front entrance and understood they were outside. She stopped in front of him. He stood. He always stood when she entered or returned to a space. It was one of those habits of his she had never been able to categorize, whether it was respect or performance or something in between. "I need you to hear something," Amara said. "I'm listening. Whatever you're thinking about doing next, whatever plan is forming right now, I need you to stop forming it and just stand here and listen. Can you do that?" He looked at her. He said, "Yes." She didn't entirely believe, but she continued anyway. "I left for reasons that had nothing to do with not caring about you. I want you to know that, because I think you've spent 6 months constructing a version of events where I left because I stopped caring, and that version is wrong. I left because staying was making me someone I didn't recognize." She paused. The waiting room still had 2 other patients in it. She lowered her voice. "I am not going to apologize for leaving. I'm not going to apologize for this." She indicated her belly with one hand. "Because she is not something that requires an apology. What I need from you right now is very simple. I need you to not make this harder than it already is. That's all." He was quiet for a beat. His jaw worked slightly. She knew that movement. It was what he did when he was pressing down on something that wanted to come up. "Where are you living?" he said. "Min-Jae. I'm not asking so I can send people there. I'm asking because you're 34 weeks pregnant and you told the midwife you were managing alone, and I want to understand what alone looks like." "It looks like me. Managing." "Amara." He said her name the way he always said it when he was trying not to say other things. "Let me take you home." "I have a home." "Let me take you to your home." She studied his face. There was no angle in it that she could find, no secondary motive presenting itself. There was only that unfamiliar rawness she had clocked in the waiting room, still sitting in the lines around his eyes. She was also, in simple physical terms, exhausted. The appointment had required 2 subway transfers and 45 minutes of waiting, and a further 40 minutes of being prodded and measured, and her back was a sustained complaint, and her feet were things she had largely stopped believing in. She said, "All right." The car was a black sedan, interior leather, warm in a way that hit her the moment she got in. One of his men drove. The other sat in the front passenger seat. Min-Jae sat beside her in the back, leaving a careful distance between them. He did not make conversation. He looked out his window. She looked out hers. Seoul moved past. The Han River. The gray afternoon light sitting on everything. After a while, he said, "Is she healthy?" "Yes." "You're healthy?" "Yes." Another silence. "I found an article," he said, 6 months ago, about iron deficiency in the 3rd trimester. I didn't—" He stopped, started again. "I didn't know why I was reading it." Amara looked at him. He was still looking out the window. His profile was the same as she remembered. The particular angle of his jaw. The slight tension he carried permanently in his shoulders. "You didn't know I was pregnant?" she said slowly. "No." "Then why were you reading pregnancy articles?" He turned to look at her then. His expression was very careful, the way expressions got when a person was choosing to reveal something they had not planned to reveal. "Because I knew you had left and I didn't know why. And I was trying to understand what I'd done, and somewhere in that process I started reading about, I don't know, the things I hadn't thought about, things I hadn't made room for." Amara did not say anything. She turned back to her window. They reached her building. It was a 6th-floor walk-up in Mapogu, standard construction, a hairdresser on the ground floor, a convenience store on the corner. Nothing about it announced itself. She had chosen it for that reason. She watched his face when he looked at it. He kept his expression neutral, but not quickly enough. There was a fraction of a second where something moved across it. Not contempt. Something closer to a wince. "Don't," she said. He looked at her. Whatever you're about to say about where I'm living, don't. I wasn't going to say anything. Your face was. He pressed his lips together. You're on which floor? Fourth. He got out of the car before she could object and came around to her side. She had already opened the door and was working on getting out, which was not graceful at 34 weeks. And she knew it, and she also did not want his help, and those two realities were currently in direct conflict. He put his hand out, not grabbing, just offering. And she looked at it for a moment and then took it because the alternative was struggling out of the low seat without assistance, and that was not a battle she was going to win with any dignity. She let go as soon as she was standing. They went up the stairs. He did not comment on the stairs. She had expected him to comment on the stairs. Her apartment was clean. She had made sure it was always clean, partly because cleanliness was one of the few things she could control, and partly because she had some obscure pride that had survived everything else. And walking into disorder felt like giving ground she wasn't willing to give. The kitchen was organized. The living area had a second-hand couch she'd reupholstered with fabric from a market stall. The nursery, the second room, barely large enough for a crib and a chest of drawers, had been painted a soft ochre she'd done herself over 3 weekends. Standing on a step stool she absolutely should not have been on. She saw Min-Jae's eyes move through the apartment. She watched him take in the crib, visible through the open nursery door. The small accumulation of things, a mobile of pressed paper cranes, a stack of folded blankets, a pair of infant socks no larger than his thumb sitting on the chest of drawers. He stopped in the doorway of the nursery. He didn't go in. He just looked. You did this yourself, he said. Yes. The paint. Yes. He was quiet for a long time. Then, without looking at her, the color is good. She didn't know why that hit her the way it did. She had expected criticism, or pity, or the particular kind of efficiently disguised takeover that was his default response to any situation he assessed as suboptimal. She had not expected him to simply stand in the doorway of her too small nursery and say the color is good. Do you want coffee? She said. If you're making it. She made it. He sat at her kitchen table, which was a thing she had not anticipated. Kang Min-Jae, sitting at her second-hand kitchen table in his expensive overcoat while she made coffee in the apartment she had built out of stubbornness and saved wages. It looked wrong in the way that things look wrong when two elements from incompatible contexts are placed together. And also, underneath that, something else. Something she did not examine. She put this coffee in front of him. She sat across the table. He wrapped both hands around the mug. His hands were large. She had forgotten the specific dimensions of them. I need to know what you need, he said. I don't need anything from you. Amara. I'm serious. I've been doing this alone for 6 months and I have a plan and I'm not… You're working. I was. I'm on leave. What happens when the baby comes? I have a plan. What's the plan? The plan is mine, she said. It doesn't require your review. He looked at her steadily. He had the quality, which she had always found both impressive and deeply maddening, of being able to wait out almost any silence. Most people, in the face of silence, eventually filled it. Min-Jae could outlast almost anyone. She held the silence back. She had learned it from him. Eventually he said, I'm not trying to take control of this. That's what you always say before you take control of something. I know. She stopped. He turned the coffee mug slightly in his hands. I know that's what I do. I'm trying to tell you that I understand that, which is different from telling you I've fixed it. He looked up at her. I haven't fixed it, but I know what it is now in a way I didn't before. What made you see it? You leaving? The apartment was very quiet. Somewhere below, a door closed. A child on the street outside shouted something, laughed, ran. You can't come back from 6 months of absence and tell me you've changed, Amara said. That's not how change works. I'm not telling you I've changed. I'm telling you I see it. Then what are you asking for? He set the mug down. He looked at the table for a moment, at the slight imperfection in the wood grain where she had sanded it, but not quite finished the job. Then he looked at her. Time, he said. That's all. I'm asking for time. She did not answer him immediately. She took her coffee and drank some of it and let the silence sit, and she was aware, with the particular hyper-awareness of the last few weeks of pregnancy, where everything felt slightly heightened and slightly unreal, of the weight of her daughter moving inside her. A slow underwater shifting, a reminder that the third person in this conversation had no vote yet but was present. "I have a question first," Amara said. "Ask it." "How did you know I was at that clinic?" Something moved across his face. Brief, but she caught it. "I didn't know. I was there because one of my associates recommended it for," he paused, "for medical matters." She looked at him. "I didn't know you were there," he said. "That's the truth." She believed him, and that made it more complicated, not less. The evening moved in without her noticing it. She had not asked him to stay exactly, and he had not announced that he was staying, but he was still at her table when the light through the windows went from gray to the orange dark of early Seoul evening, and at some point he had taken off his coat and draped it over the back of the chair, and she had allowed that without commenting. She made rice and a simple stew because it was what she had, and she was not performing for him. He ate without comment, which she appreciated more than she could explain. His men, she presumed, were waiting in the car. She did not ask. After dinner, she stood at the sink washing the bowls, and he stood beside her with a dish towel and dried them, which was so profoundly incongruous with everything she knew about his daily existence that she almost laughed. Almost. "You know you don't have to—" "I know," he said, and dried the bowl. Later, sitting on the couch with her feet elevated because her ankles had swelled again, she said, "There are things I need you to understand, not ask for. Understand. If you're going to be anywhere near this, Min-Jae, if you're going to be in her life, tell me. I make the decisions about her, not you. You can have input, you can be present, but if you override me, if you go around me, if you move pieces without telling me, if you do the thing you always do where you've already decided what's best before anyone else has been consulted, I will end this before it begins. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" He was quiet. His hands were resting on his knees again, that particular posture of his. "Yes. I need you to say it back to me, so I know we're talking about the same thing." He turned to look at her. "You make the decisions about her. I don't go around you. If I think something needs to happen, I talk to you first. I don't move without you knowing. And if you do, then I have broken your trust, and you have every right to remove me from both your lives." She looked at him for a long moment. His face was level. Not performing sincerity, she had seen him perform sincerity, in boardrooms and across negotiating tables, and it had a quality of smoothness to it. This was not smooth. This was effortful, the way honesty often was for people who had spent years not needing to practice it. "Okay," she said. He nodded. He looked back at his hands. Then his phone rang. He glanced at it, and she saw something in his posture change. A tightening, a small hydraulic shift that she recognized from 18 months of watching him receive calls he didn't want to receive. He stood and moved to the far side of the room. He answered in Korean, his voice low. She heard one word 3 times in quick succession, each time with decreasing affect and increasing precision, the way his voice got when something was wrong and he was processing it in real time. He ended the call. He stood with his back to her for a moment before he turned around. "I need to go," he said. "Go. I'll come back tomorrow." She had not agreed to that. She opened her mouth to say so. Then she looked at his face. Whatever had been on the phone had removed the careful rawness of the last few hours and replaced it with something older and harder. Something she recognized from the early months of their marriage, before she understood what it meant. "What happened?" she said. "Nothing that concerns you." "Min-Jae? It's handled." He was putting his coat on. "Amara, it's— Don't tell me it's nothing. You have that face." He paused with one arm through the coat sleeve. Looked at her. "What face?" "The face you wear when something is very wrong and you've already decided not to tell me about it." He finished putting the coat on. He picked up his phone from the table. He stopped at the door. He turned around. "There was an inquiry," he said. "About you. Someone made an inquiry today through a third-party channel that my organization monitors. They were asking for your current address." The air in the apartment changed. Amara sat forward on the couch. "Who?" "I don't know yet." "Who would—" She stopped. She knew who. Some part of her had known, on some low animal level, since before she had a name for it. Elijah. Min-Jae's expression confirmed it before he said anything. "We don't know that yet," he said. "It's being looked into." "Park Elijah has been looking for me." "Amara. How long?" Her voice had gone flat. "How long has he been looking?" "I don't know the timeline yet. My people picked this up today because of the inquiry. That doesn't mean it started today. He paused. I think you should come with me tonight. I'm not leaving my apartment because I think you should come with me tonight, he said again. Quieter. Not because I'm telling you, because someone is trying to find you, and they may already have. And you are 34 weeks pregnant and alone on the 4th floor of a building with no security, and I am not going to pretend I'm comfortable with that when it would be a lie. She looked at him. She looked at the door. She looked at the nursery doorway, at the mobile of paper cranes visible in the dark room. She thought about Elijah, about the folder slamming on the table, the spreading stain of coffee, the smile he had put on when he'd said, "You thought you could take what belongs to me." She thought about how she had moved to another country and changed her number and rebuilt herself from almost nothing, and how that had bought her 6 months and apparently not an inch more. She thought about her daughter, that slow underwater wait, the heartbeat she had heard 40 minutes into the appointment, steady and indifferent and entirely dependent on the decisions Amara made. "If I come with you," she said, "I'm not conceding anything. I'm not agreeing to anything. I'm making a practical decision for one night because my daughter's safety is more important than the point I'm trying to make." "I understand that," he said, "and tomorrow we talk. About all of it. About Elijah, and what your people know, and what they're going to do about it, and I am part of that conversation. I don't receive information afterward. I'm in it." "Yes. I mean it, Min-Jae. I know you mean it." She looked at him for a long, still moment. Outside, the city pushed on. Far below, she heard the familiar street sounds of her neighborhood. The cart vendor on the corner, a delivery scooter, 2 people laughing about something. The ordinary sound of a city that did not know or care what was happening in this apartment on the 4th floor. She reached for the bag she kept packed by the door. She had packed it 3 weeks ago for the hospital. It was sitting there within arm's reach, as though some version of her had known she might need it for something other than its intended purpose. She picked it up. Min-Jae crossed the room and took it from her before she could argue. He did it with the particular efficiency of someone who has assessed a situation and acted on the assessment, which was so characteristic that it could have annoyed her, and would have, under any other version of tonight. But her hands were freed and her back thanked her, and she let it go. They went down the stairs, into the cold. His car was waiting. She got in. As the car moved through the city toward wherever Min-Jae's penthouse was, she didn't ask. She was too tired to ask. She sat in the back seat with her packed hospital bag between her feet and the city lights beginning outside the window. And she thought about Park Elijah and what he wanted and how long he had been watching. And for the first time since she had taken that pregnancy test on the floor of her new bathroom, the life she had built so carefully felt less like something she had constructed and more like something she had been allowed. She did not say that out loud, but the thought sat in her chest like a coal, and it did not go out. The penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a building in Yongsan that Amara had passed 100 times without knowing who owned it. From the outside, it was glass and steel, like everything else in that district, indistinguishable from the corporate towers flanking it. Inside, it was something else, not ostentatious, which had surprised her the first time she'd seen it during their marriage, because she had expected ostentation from Min-Jae, and he had delivered restraint instead. Clean lines, dark wood, the kind of furniture chosen by someone with taste rather than someone trying to display it. She had been here before. That was the strange part. Walking back through the entrance with her hospital bag was not like walking into a stranger's space. Her body remembered it. The particular hum of the elevator. The slight give of the flooring in the main hallway. The way the city revealed itself through the floor-to-ceiling windows, all of Seoul laid out below, its lights beginning to assert themselves against the November dark. A woman named Mrs. Han ran the household. She was 60, precise, and had been with Min-Jae for 11 years. She appeared in the entrance hallway as they came in and looked at Amara and the hospital bag and Min-Jae's face in sequence, recalibrating, and then said very simply, "I'll prepare the East Room," and disappeared. "You don't have to stay in the East Room," Min-Jae said. "I know," Amara said. "The East Room is fine." He did not argue. She ate something Mrs. Han brought in soup, warm, with more nutritional density than anything Amara had managed to put together in recent weeks. And she sat at the long dining table while Min-Jae stood at the window with his phone. He was on and off it for the better part of an hour. She watched him without appearing to. The particular economy of his posture when a call was bad. The way he turned from the window when he wanted to think without the city as a backdrop. At some point, she fell asleep sitting up, which was how pregnancy worked in the final stretch, and she woke to find a blanket over her shoulders that had not been there before and Min-Jae no longer in the room. She went to the east room. She slept. In the morning, he was already at the table with coffee and documents when she came out. Not physical documents. His tablet, a laptop, a yellow legal pad covered in his handwriting, which was small and compressed and always had been. He had clearly not slept or had slept very briefly. There was a quality of sustained alertness to him that she recognized as something he ran on sometimes for days at a time during difficult operations. Mrs. Han produced breakfast. Min-Jae closed the laptop when Amara sat down, which she noted. "Tell me what you know," she said. He looked at her across the table. He measured something. Then he said, "My people tracked the inquiry back to a private investigation firm operating out of Incheon. The firm has done work for Park Elijah before. Legally registered, clean on the surface. Immigration tracing, background research, that category of service. He hired someone to find me. He hired someone to monitor you. There's a difference in scale." He turned the legal pad slightly without showing her what was on it. "The inquiry yesterday was one of at least 9 we can confirm over the past 4 months. Your neighborhood, your clinic, your workplace before you went on leave." Amara set her coffee down. 9, she said, "that we can confirm. The actual number may be higher. He's been watching me for 4 months. At minimum." She sat with that. She thought about the last 4 months, the sense, on certain evenings, that something was slightly wrong with the shape of things. A car that sat outside her building 2 days running. A man on the subway platform who looked away too quickly. She had attributed those things to the particular hypervigilance of late pregnancy, the way her brain had turned inward and made everything feel slightly threatening. She had told herself she was imagining it. She had not been imagining it. "Why?" she said. "He let me leave. He didn't fight the divorce. He was—" She stopped. She organized the sentence more carefully. "He was glad to be free of me. That was the impression I had. Why would he start looking 4 months ago?" Min-Jae was quiet for a moment. He turned the legal pad over, face down. "How much did you know about Elijah's financial situation when you were married?" "Not much. He kept that separate." "Did you know he was facing insolvency?" She looked up. "What?" "His company. The construction concern he runs, the one with the Busan contracts, has been under financial review for the last 14 months. He over-leveraged on 3 simultaneous projects that went sideways. He's been managing the appearance of solvency, while the actual structure underneath has been collapsing." She was very still. "He never told me that." "No, because the marriage was already over before it became critical." He paused. "A child with a documented connection to my organization, to my name, to my resources, would represent, to someone in Elijah's position, a significant piece of leverage. The thing she had been not thinking since last night arrived fully formed in the front of her mind. She let it sit there. She looked at it directly, which was the only way she had ever been able to deal with things she didn't want to be true. "He wants to use her," she said. "Not because he wants to be her father. He wants a legal connection, paternity claim. He was your husband when you conceived, which in South Korean law creates a presumptive. He's not her father. He doesn't need to be her biological father for the legal presumption to apply if you were still legally married when she was conceived. The divorce was finalized 4 months ago." Min-Jae said this evenly, factually, as though he were reading from a document, but his jaw was doing the thing. "The timeline is close enough that he could contest it. I have medical records. The conception date is, I know, and they would be relevant in a paternity proceeding, but proceedings take time. Injunctions are possible. A man with enough money, or enough borrowed credibility, can slow a legal process long enough to use it as leverage." He looked at her. "He's not planning to win in court, Amara. He's planning to threaten to fight in court long enough to force a negotiation. With me. He wants money. He wants a settlement that rescues his company. He is planning to use your daughter as the instrument." She heard herself breathing. The sound of it, slightly too fast, filled her ears. "He's been building a file," she said. "It came out flat." "We believe so, yes." "That's why the monitoring. He was documenting my circumstances, my finances, the conditions of the pregnancy, building a case for an unfit mother claim if the paternity angle didn't." She stopped. She put her hand flat on the table. "He was building a file to establish that I was an unfit mother." Min-Jae said nothing. Answer me. That is the most probable interpretation of what we're seeing, yes. She stood up. She walked to the window because she needed to move and there was nowhere to go, and the window was the furthest point from the table. Below, Sol was fully awake, bright and indifferent and enormous. She put her forehead against the glass. It was cold. The cold felt necessary. She heard Min-Jae push his chair back. She heard him cross the room. He stopped a few feet behind her. "Don't touch me right now," she said. He stopped. "I need a minute." He gave her the minute. She stood with her head against the glass, and she did not cry. She was too angry to cry. Anger had replaced everything else. It was filling the available space, and she thought about Park Elijah and the progression of events that had led from a marriage she had ended to standing in her ex-husband's penthouse, being told that her former legal husband was building a legal case against her using her unborn child as a financial instrument. She thought about the clinic yesterday, the folder slamming on the table. She hadn't imagined that. She had thought it was chance, Elijah arriving for some unrelated reason and finding her there. But it hadn't been chance at all. He had known she was at that clinic. He had known her schedule. He had stood there and looked at her belly and smiled. "He was there yesterday," she said, "at the clinic. He knew I'd be there." "Yes," Min-Jae said, behind her, very still. "He was collecting something. Evidence, a scene, photographs maybe." She turned around. "Was he photographing me?" Min-Jae's expression answered before he did. "We believe his investigator was present outside the clinic, yes. So there are photographs of me, 8 months pregnant, looking—" She stopped. She thought about how she'd looked yesterday morning. The borrowed sneakers. The exhaustion she wore like a second coat. He's building a picture of a woman who can barely take care of herself. "He won't be able to use it the way he intends to," Min-Jae said. "My legal team is already—" "Your legal team." She heard her own voice, the edge on it. "Min-Jae, I don't have a legal team. I have a second-hand couch and a fourth-floor walk-up, and those photographs. That's what I have." "You have me. I didn't ask for you." "I know that." He kept his voice level. "I know you didn't ask. But I am here and I am not a small resource, and I am telling you that Elijah's plan is not going to work. Not because I'm going to do something violent. I'm not. But because I have lawyers who are better than anything he can hire, and I have information, and I have the ability to make his financial situation significantly worse before this becomes a legal battle, which means he may never choose to make it a legal battle." She looked at him. She felt the anger going sideways, which was worse than having it directed. Anger she could use. Anger going sideways became something she couldn't manage. "I spent 6 months," she said, "building something I thought was mine, something clean, something he couldn't touch. I know. And it turns out I was being watched the whole time. Everything I thought I was building, he was cataloging, building his file." She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. "He took that from me. He took the 6 months." "He didn't take the 6 months," Min-Jae said, quietly but firmly. "You built what you built. He took photographs of it. That's not the same as taking it." She looked at him. "You're going to tell me you want to destroy him," she said. "What I want and what I'm going to do are not the same thing. I've been working on that distinction. Don't be clever right now. I can't handle clever right now." "I'm not being clever." He took one step closer. "I'm telling you that my instinct, yes, is to make Park Elijah understand pain in terms he can physically feel. That is my honest answer. And I'm also telling you that I'm not going to do that. Because it doesn't help you. It doesn't help her. It makes me the story instead of him. And he wins when I become the story." She watched him. She looked for the place where it broke, where the performance cracked and showed the older thing underneath. She didn't find it. "What are you going to do?" she said. "Today, my legal team files a formal challenge to any paternity presumption, supported by medical documentation and witness testimony. Simultaneously, we open a financial investigation into his company through a third-party auditing firm that has no visible connection to me. We document what we already know about his insolvency. Then we have a conversation with certain people who hold his debt, not threatening them, just making sure they understand the situation more fully than they currently do. And that destroys his leverage. That makes his leverage cost more than it's worth, which for a man in his financial position is effectively the same thing." She was quiet for a long time. She was looking at his face. She was trying to remember who this man was, the specific person, because he was presenting in a way she hadn't fully encountered before. and she needed to understand it before she decided what to do with it. She had known Min-Jae as a possessive husband. She had known him as a powerful man who mistook control for love. She had not known him as this patient, strategic, legally bounded version. She didn't know if she was looking at a change or a performance. She genuinely didn't know. I need to see everything your people have, she said. Not a summary, not a presentation, the actual documents. Whatever they found, I want to read it. I'll have it sent up. I want to call my own lawyer. Good. I'll get you a name. I have a name, she said. I have a lawyer. I've had one since I left you because I wasn't an idiot about what leaving you might involve. She paused. I need to call her and brief her on this before your team does anything. I'm not having your people move on my situation without my lawyer knowing what's happening. He absorbed that. He nodded. All right. And I want to talk to someone at the clinic about the photographer outside, about whether my medical privacy has been compromised. I can arrange it. I'll call them myself. She held eye contact. I'm not managing this through you. I will work with you on the parts that require your resources. I will not hand this to you to run. He held her gaze. His jaw was still. Yes. She turned back to the window. Below, Seoul. The permanent motion of it. She watched a delivery truck navigate a turn, the driver's arm out the window despite the cold, waving at someone on the sidewalk. She thought about the nursery in her apartment. The ochre walls she had done herself on a step stool she shouldn't have been on. The mobile of paper cranes. The small socks on the chest of drawers. She thought about her daughter, turning slow in the dark interior warmth, building lungs and fingernails and opinions. One more thing, she said. Yes. If at any point I find out you've moved on something without telling me, if I find out your people did something and I learned about it afterward, if I find out you managed me the way you used to manage me, where I got the information after the decision was already made. She stopped. She turned around to look at him directly. I won't give you a second chance to explain it. I want you to understand that. There's no conversation after that. There's no version where you tell me why it was necessary, and I come around. Do you understand? He was looking at her with an expression that was not comfortable and was not supposed to be. Yes, he said. I understand. She turned back to the window. She picked up her phone from the windowsill where she'd set it. She found her lawyer's number. Then Min-Jae's phone rang again. The sound of it, his particular ringtone, one she had unconsciously memorized during their marriage, was different this time. The ringtone he used for one specific person in his organization. She knew because she had asked once and he had told her. His head of security. He answered. He listened. His face closed down the way faces closed when information was arriving that required immediate reprocessing of everything that had come before. He said 2 words in Korean, then ended the call. He turned around. When she saw his face, she put her own phone down. What? She said. The investigation firm Elijah hired, he said. My people pulled their client records. Elijah is not their only client. What does that mean? He set his phone on the table. He stood very still, the way he'd been still in the clinic waiting room. That stillness that meant something internal was happening that had no external outlet yet. They've been monitoring other women, he said. Not just you. 7 other women, all of them pregnant, all of them connected, through family, through former relationships, through business, to men in positions similar to mine. Similar industries. The air in the penthouse changed. Similar industries, she said carefully. Organized money, private influence. Men with significant assets and significant reasons to avoid public legal proceedings. He paused. Elijah is not running this alone. He doesn't have the resources or the sophistication for an operation this size. He's a participant. Someone recruited him. Someone identified you as a target because of your connection to me, and then identified him as the instrument, the legal mechanism through which pressure could be applied, and built the paternity angle as a delivery system. Amara sat down. She sat down because her legs required it. Someone targeted me, she said. Not because of Elijah. Because of you. Because of me, he said. And Elijah is just, he's being used. He agreed to be used. He benefits if it works. But yes, someone above him designed this. He sat across from her. There is a network operating across multiple families, using pregnancy as leverage, using unborn children as instruments. His voice remained factual, which she understood was because the alternative, letting the actual weight of what he was saying into his voice, would make it harder to think. This is sophisticated, and it has been building for longer than 4 months. We are not the only targets, and Elijah is not the architect. She sat with that. She thought about 7 women like her, in the last weeks of pregnancy, unaware that their bodies, their daughters, their sons, the specific and unrepeatable people growing inside them, were being cataloged as leverage by people who had decided that the most powerful instrument in the world was a man's fear for his child. She thought about what kind of person built a machine like that. She thought about the fact that she was sitting in the middle of it. "Who?" she said. "I don't know yet. But you're going to find out. Yes. And when you find out." She looked at him. "Min-Jae, when you find out who built this, I need to know before you do anything. I need to be in that room." He looked at her for a long time. She could see him weighing it. The old reflex: protect by excluding, keep her away from the dangerous parts, decide what she needed to know and when. She could see it moving through him. She held his gaze and did not look away. "Yes," he said. "You'll be in that room." She held the word. She turned it over. She tried to determine whether it was the truth or the thing he said now, and revised later when the situation seemed to require it. She could not tell. That was the honest answer. She could not tell, and she had to decide whether to move forward anyway. And she was 34 weeks pregnant, and someone had built a network around her unborn child. And the only resource she currently had that was large enough to meet that network was sitting across this table. She picked up her phone. She found her lawyer's number, so began to dial, and as the line rang, she looked out the window at Seoul. Enormous, indifferent, moving. And she understood that the 6 months she had spent building a careful small life had just ended. What came next would not be careful. What came next would not be small. And for the first time since she had taken that pregnancy test on the floor of her bathroom and decided she could do this alone, Amara Bennett was not sure that alone was something she could afford. Cho had the car waiting at the basement exit of the building, which meant he had anticipated that they would not be leaving through the front. Amara noticed that. She noticed a lot of things about how Min-Jae's operation moved. The small, precise decisions that happened without announcement, the way infrastructure appeared exactly where it was needed without anyone explaining how it got there. She had noticed the same quality during their marriage and had found it reassuring then. She found it more complicated now because she understood it better. The basement was cold and smelled of concrete and exhaust, and the particular underground dampness of Seoul in November. 2 cars. Cho at the first one, engine running. A second man she didn't recognize at the second car. Same posture, same quality of patient readiness. 2 cars, she said. Standard when the situation is active, Min-Jae said. I was moving with the focused economy she had seen in him before. When something required his full operational attention, he was not running. Nothing about him was visibly urgent, but every movement was stripped of anything unnecessary, and that economy was its own kind of urgency. Where are we going? My office, not the penthouse. He opened the car door for her. The operational center. It's more secure and I need to be near my people for this. She got in. The effort of getting into a car at 34 weeks was still a negotiation with her own body, and she made it without asking for help, and he did not offer help she hadn't asked for, and that had become one of their small established protocols in the 24 hours they had been navigating this together. The car moved. Cho drove with the particular efficiency of someone who treated traffic as a problem set rather than an obstacle. Min-Jae was on his phone. She looked out her window and thought about Shin Dae-won. She had a name now, a shape for the thing. She thought about what it meant that someone had looked at her specifically, Amara Bennett, 34 weeks pregnant, living alone in Mapogu, and had seen not a person but an instrument, a mechanism, a lever attached to a man with resources. She thought about the other 7 women and whether any of them had that name yet. The operational center, she said. How many people? Currently on site, 12. My core team. Min-Jae didn't look up from his phone. You'll have a room, private. You don't have to be in the operational space if you don't want to be. I want to be in the operational space. He looked up at that. I told you, she said. I'm in the room. He held her gaze for a moment, then he looked back at his phone. All right. The operational center was in Gangnam, which she had not expected. She had assumed something more concealed, something in an industrial district or behind a layer of corporate camouflage. Instead, It was on the 14th floor of a building that housed, on its lower floors, a legitimate financial services firm that Min-Jae owned controlling interest in. The floor itself was registered to a consulting company. It looked, from the elevator, like an ordinary open-plan office in the early stages of being set up. Exposed ceilings, clean desks, monitors. Then she registered what was on the monitors and understood that it was not an office in any ordinary sense. 12 people. 8 at workstations, 4 moving between stations, and a central table covered in printed documents and tablets. The age range was younger than she'd expected. Most of them appeared to be in their late 20s or early 30s, with the focused, sleep-optional quality of people who had been running on operational time for hours. They all knew who she was. She could see it in the specific calibration of their attention when she entered. Not staring, not looking away too deliberately. The particular careful awareness of people who have been briefed. Cho moved to the central table. Min-Jae moved with him. Amara followed. "Where are we?" Min-Jae said. Not a question directed at any one person. The room answered. A woman at the nearest workstation, late 20s, hair pulled back, the kind of focused precision in her face that suggested she was the person whose numbers you trusted most, said, Shin's legal team filed 4 injunctions at 9:47. Family court, commercial court, 2 cross-jurisdictional. The commercial injunctions are designed to freeze asset transfer proceedings attached to the families he's been leveraging. If they hold, the families can't liquidate anything without triggering automatic scrutiny. Are they going to hold? Min-Jae said. The commercial ones possibly for 72 hours. The family court ones are weaker. They're based on the paternity presumption framework, which is our primary target anyway. She glanced at Amara briefly, not disrespectfully, just acknowledging the connection. If we can get the paternity challenge on record before the family court injunction is reviewed, the injunction loses its legal foundation. Min-Jae is filing now, Amara said. Everyone looked at her. She kept her voice steady. She said end of day. Do we know if that's fast enough? Depends on which judge picks up the review, the woman said. If it's Cho Sung-hyun, he moves fast and he's clean. If it's Park Min-jun, he'll sit on it for 48 hours minimum. Min-Jae looked at Cho. Cho pulled out his phone and stepped away from the table. Amara looked at the central monitor. It was displaying a network diagram. Nodes and connections. Names she didn't all recognize. Lines between them in different colors, indicating different relationship types. She could read enough of it to see her own name. She could see Elijah's. She could see Shin's at the center of the structure, with the most connections radiating outward. The 7 other women, she said. Are they on this? The woman at the workstation hesitated. She looked at Min-Jae. Answer her, Min-Jae said. Yes, the woman said. We identified them through cross-referencing the investigation firm's client accounts with the monitoring data we accessed. The targeting pattern was consistent. Each woman was connected to a primary asset holder through either current or former legal relationship. She paused. Most of them don't know yet. Most, Amara said. Which ones know? 2. Their families' security teams picked up the surveillance independently and traced it to the same firm we did. They reached out to us 40 minutes ago. Amara processed that. They reached out to Min-Jae's organization. Yes, because the investigation led them here. Because the investigation led them to the same firm and the same architecture, and when they pulled the thread further, they found our fingerprints on the server access. The woman said this matter-of-factly. Not apologetic, not defensive, just accurate. 2 of the families are now aware we have the full communications package. They want to know what we're going to do with it. Amara looked at Min-Jae. He was looking at the network diagram. I was doing the thing she had watched him do across 2 years and 48 hours. The internal calculation that preceded every move, the rapid assessment of leverage and exposure, and what each path cost. She could see it happening. She was starting to understand what it looked like from the outside. We give them the same option, he said. The package goes to prosecutors. All of it, tonight. Anyone who wants to provide additional evidence should contact their own legal representation and make the same referral independently. The more sources the evidence arrives from, the harder Shin's team can argue it was manufactured. And the families who haven't been told yet, Amara said. The advocacy organization, he said. He was still looking at the diagram. Tonight, not tomorrow. They need to know before Shin's lawyers find a way to use the injunctions to create enough chaos that the story gets buried. Cho came back to the table. The review judge is Park Min-Jae. The room absorbed that. 48 hours, Amara said. Minimum, the workstation woman said. Then we need the paternity challenge filed and confirmed within the next 6 hours, before Min-Jae's office officially opens the review. If it's on record before he touches it, it changes the foundation of what he's reviewing. She looked at Min-Jae. Can Min-Jae move faster? Min-Jae was already on his phone. He stepped away. Amara stayed at the table. She looked at the network diagram. She looked at Shin's note at the center and the lines radiating out and the names at the ends of those lines. Some of them families she could identify, some of them organizational entities she couldn't read, some of them marked with identifiers she didn't understand. What are these? She asked the workstation woman, indicating a cluster of nodes she didn't recognize, marked with a different color from the rest. The woman looked at where she was pointing. Her expression shifted slightly. Those are the historical targets, the cases before ours, the 2 prior settlements, and 2 more we identified that didn't result in settlement. The families resisted. The proceedings were withdrawn. Amara counted. 4 prior operations. Yes. How long has he been running this? A pause. We believe 5 years. The earliest target we can trace is from 5 years ago, which means... The woman stopped herself. Which means he's been doing this to families for 5 years and nobody caught it, Amara said. Nobody caught it because it looked like domestic legal proceedings. It looks like private disputes between private parties. Family court doesn't aggregate across cases the way criminal court does. Nobody was looking at the pattern. Amara looked at the diagram. 5 years. Families. Pregnant women used as instruments. The specific, sustained brutality of a machine designed to be invisible. She felt the contraction coming a full 30 seconds before it arrived. She recognized it now. The building pressure. The way her body gathered itself before the event. She had been having them since morning. She had been noting the intervals and finding them inconsistent enough that she had classified them as Braxton Hicks, the false labor that was common in the final weeks. And she had categorized them that way because the alternative required attention she did not have available. This one was not inconsistent. This one had a clarity and a duration that the previous ones had not had. She put her hand on the edge of the table. She did not make a sound. She breathed through it the way the materials had described, slowly, with focus, from the diaphragm, and she waited for it to crest and fall. It crested. It fell. It took 45 seconds. She straightened. She looked at the network diagram. The workstation woman was looking at her. Are you all right? I'm fine, Amara said. Keep going. The woman looked at her for another moment. She looked at Amara's hand on the table edge. She looked at the slight change in Amara's breathing that Amara had not fully been able to conceal. She said very quietly, so that it didn't carry to the rest of the room. How far apart? Amara looked at her. I have 2 kids, the woman said, simply. No drama in it. Amara did the math. She had been tracking since this morning and then not tracking when she'd reclassified them, and now she was retracking in real time, and the honest answer was, I'm not sure, she said. Possibly 20 minutes? Possibly less? The woman held her gaze. You should tell him. Not yet. Ms. Bennett, not yet, Amara said. He has 12 minutes of work to do on that phone that will determine whether this entire operation holds together, and I have time, and I am telling you not yet. The woman held her gaze for one more second. Then she turned back to her workstation. Min-Jae came back to the table. He had his lawyer face on, the face he wore when he had received information and processed it, and was now reporting results. Min-Jae can have the filing submitted within 3 hours if she has the final affidavit from the lead medical practitioner confirming conception date. The practitioner is currently unreachable. She's in surgery. I have the backup affidavit, Amara said. She opened her phone. She found the email she had prepared with Min-Jae 3 weeks ago, the contingency document, the one she had drafted in her apartment on a quiet Tuesday, when she had still believed the only legal battle she might face was a straightforward divorce finalization. Her backup, Dr. Lim, at the same clinic. She has all the records. Min-Jae has her number. Min-Jae already tried. Dr. Lim is not answering. She doesn't answer unknown numbers. Amara found the contact. She handed her phone to Min-Jae. Call from mine. He looked at the phone. He called. Dr. Lim answered on the second ring. Amara took the phone back. She explained the situation in 3 sentences. Dr. Lim asked 2 clarifying questions. Amara answered them. Dr. Lim said she would have the affidavit signed and transmitted to Min-Jae's office within 40 minutes. Amara handed the phone back to Min-Jae. He was looking at her. Not at the network diagram, not at Cho, not at the operational room. At her. The way he looked when he had registered something and was deciding how much of what he'd registered to act on. "You're in labor," he said. Not a question. The workstation woman did not look up from her screen. "I'm possibly in early labor," Amara said. "I have time. The filing needs to happen before... You are 34 weeks pregnant, and you are possibly in labor, and you are standing in my operations room." "Yes. And the filing needs to happen before Park Min-Jun's office opens the injunction review. In that order. The filing first." She held his gaze. "I am not going to a hospital until the affidavit is transmitted, and Min-Jae confirms receipt. That's 22 minutes if Dr. Lim moves fast. I can give you 22 minutes. His jaw tightened. The muscles in his face did something she had not seen before. A suppression of something very large, the compression of an entire category of feeling into a controlled surface. He was looking at her, and behind his eyes was something that had gone beyond operational calculation into something more immediate and more animal, the thing that happened to people when the person they cared about was in a situation they could not control. She had made him afraid. She could see it. She had never made him afraid before. "Cho," he said, without taking his eyes off her. "Car ready at the basement in 15 minutes. "It's already ready," Cho said. 22 minutes, Amara said. 18, Min-Jae said. "We leave in 18. She wanted to argue. She looked at his face and decided 18 was acceptable. She stayed at the table. She watched the room work. She answered 2 questions that came to her through the workstation woman. She had apparently been elected the primary point of contact for Amara in the operational space, and Amara respected that election. She tracked her phone for the transmission confirmation from Dr. Lim. She tracked the intervals as another contraction arrived at minute 14, longer and more definitive than the one before. This one she managed less invisibly. Not because it was unmanageable, but because it required more of her physical attention and less was available for the performance of being fine. Min-Jae was beside her before it crested. He didn't touch her. He was just there in her peripheral vision, present with the quality of presence that meant he was not going anywhere. 14 minutes, she said, when she could say anything. "What?" "The interval, 14 minutes. He looked at Cho. "Now," he said. "The confirmation," she started. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Dr. Lim's transmission had gone to Min-Jae 30 seconds ago. She texted Min-Jae. "Received?" The response came in 8 seconds. "Received. Filing in 90 minutes." She showed the screen to Min-Jae. "Good," he said. He had her hospital bag. She realized Cho had retrieved it from the car, had planned for it to be available here. "Let's go." She did not argue. The drive to the hospital was not long, and it was not short. It was the kind of drive that existed in a different temporal register than ordinary drives, each minute expanding to accommodate the amount of information her body was generating. The contractions had moved to 11 minutes by the time they reached the hospital entrance, and she was doing the breathing and thinking simultaneously about the filing and about Sora and about the specific quality of pain which was nothing like she had expected and exactly like the materials had described, and both of those things were simultaneously true. Min-Jae was beside her in the back seat. At some point during the drive she had reached to her left and taken his hand, which was not a decision she had made consciously. He held it with steadiness and did not comment on it. The hospital had them in a room within 12 minutes. The midwife on duty, a different one from her clinic, more senior, with the unhurried competence of someone who had done this thousands of times, checked her and said, 5 centimeters. You're progressing well. You have time. Time was relative. In the room, when the immediate medical assessment was done and the machines were running and the particular steady beat of Sora's heart was audible in the room, Amara's phone delivered 3 things in close succession. Min-Jae, filing confirmed, submitted at 11:47 p.m. Judge's review clock starts tomorrow morning. We beat it. Cho, to Min-Jae's phone, which Min-Jae read and showed to Amara. 2 additional families have submitted independent evidence referrals to the prosecutor's office. Shin's legal team has been notified of the criminal investigation scope. And then, from a number she didn't have saved but recognized, it was Elijah's personal number, which she had deleted 8 months ago, but whose digits were embedded in her memory with the particular permanence of numbers you've dialed from fear. It was a single line of text. "I'm out. I'll cooperate. I'm sorry." She read it twice. She thought about what that cost him to send. She thought about whether it changed anything about what she felt, which was nothing so simple as forgiveness and nothing so simple as contempt. It was more complicated and more human than either, and she did not have a word for it, and she suspected she might not for a long time. She handed the phone to Min-Jae without comment. He read it. He handed it back. He did not offer an interpretation of it. She appreciated that. The next several hours were not hours in any normal sense. They were a different unit of time, measured in contractions and breathing and the intervals between, and the particular sustained effort of a body doing the most physically demanding thing it would ever do. Min-Jae stayed in the room. She had not asked him to stay and she had not asked him to go, and he had read that correctly as permission and stayed. He held her hand when she needed it, held and released it when she needed her hands free. And at one point, when the midwife stepped out briefly, said something to her in Korean, not translated, not explained, that had the cadence of something personal, something directed specifically at her, and she said, "What does that mean?" And he said, "It means you are the most capable person I have ever watched do anything." And she said, "That's a very high bar given what you watch people do." And he said, "I know." And she almost laughed, which was not what she expected to be doing at that moment. At 8:17 in the evening, Sora arrived. She came with the committed fury of a person who had developed strong opinions during 9 months of preparation and wanted those opinions acknowledged immediately. The sound of her filled the room. It was the specific, complete sound of life insisting on itself, and it was so total that for a moment it was the only thing in the room that existed. She was placed on Amara's chest. She was red and wrinkled, and she smelled like something ancient and immediate simultaneously, and her hands were the size of the part of Amara's palm between the heel and the first crease of the fingers, and she was perfect in the way that nothing else Amara had ever encountered had been perfect. Not flawlessly, not without complication, but completely. Amara held her and did not say anything. She did not need to say anything. Sora was saying everything, with sustained commitment and full volume and absolute authority, and the only appropriate response was to hold her and breathe, and let the fact of her be as large as it was. When Amara finally looked up, she found Min-Jae. He had backed against the far wall of the room during the final stage, giving space, staying out of the way of the medical staff with the precise discipline of a man who understood when his role was to not interfere. I was standing with his back almost touching the wall, and he was looking at Sora with an expression that required Amara to look away from it because it was too large for direct observation. She looked back down at Sora. She heard the sound of Min-Jae's breathing, slightly uneven, on the other side of the room. The midwife asked if the father would like to come closer. Min-Jae crossed the room. He sat in the chair beside the bed. He looked at Sora, at all the specific details of her, the dark hair, the wrinkled intensity, the hands still curled into the fists of someone who had arrived prepared for conflict, and his throat moved. "She's angry," he said. His voice had lost the operational quality entirely. It was rough in a way she hadn't heard. "She's thorough," Amara said. "She's doing a full assessment." He looked at Sora's face, and something happened to his, something she watched arrive and move through him, and had no existing category for in her experience of human beings. It was not simple. Fathers in films had simple moments. This was not simple. This was the specific, unrepeatable event of a particular person encountering another particular person for the first time in a way that neither could undo, and the complexity of who both of them were made it complicated and enormous and not simple at all. The midwife placed Sora in his arms when he asked, which she noted, not when the midwife offered, and showed him how to support her head, and he adjusted his forearms with the focused attention of someone learning a physical skill that actually mattered to him, which was different from the physical skills he'd spent his life developing. Sora stopped crying. She looked at him with the vague, resolving gaze of a newborn encountering a new face, and she was quiet. Min-Jae looked down at her. Amara looked away. She looked at the window. Outside Seoul. Its permanent motion, its permanent light, its permanent indifference to the specific dramas of its inhabitants. She had stood at so many of its windows in the last 8 months. This one, from the hospital room, showed a slice of elevated freeway, and beyond it the residential lights of a district she didn't know well. Her phone buzzed. She reached for it with the hand that was not in Min-Jae's current line of sight. "Min-Jae, motion confirmed active. Injunction review suspended pending challenge. We're ahead of him." She exhaled. It was not the exhale of relief exactly. It was the exhale of a person who has been holding something very heavy for a very long time and has just been told she can set it down. Not forever, not completely, but for now. For this particular night. She put the phone face down on the blanket. Min-Jae, she said. He looked up from Sora. Cho needs to know to move on the prosecutor referral tonight, not tomorrow. The injunction is suspended, but Shin's lawyers are going to find another angle by morning. He looked at her. He was holding his daughter. His expression was the particular expression of a man being asked to split his attention between the two most important things that had ever coexisted in the same room. I'll call him, he said. You're holding her. I can hold her and call him, he called. He kept his voice low and precise and did not look away from Sora's face while he spoke. 3 sentences. The evidence package goes tonight. All communications forwarded independently. Contact the 2 cooperating families and coordinate simultaneous submission. He ended the call. He looked at Sora. Done, he said. Amara looked at him. She looked at the way he was holding his daughter, the already improving alignment of his forearms, the specific care of a large person handling a small person, and being aware of the asymmetry at every moment. She looked at his face, which was the face of someone who had just handed over the primary instrument of his power to a set of institutions he had spent his entire career operating outside, and was holding his daughter, and was not, she looked carefully, was not visibly regretful about either. How does that feel? She said. He understood what she meant. Strange, he said, like walking through a door that closes behind you. Is that bad? He looked at Sora. No, he said. I don't think it is. She believed him. She couldn't have explained why she believed him. She had a lifetime of reasons to be cautious. 2 years of specific evidence about what trust cost when it was extended to him prematurely. But she believed him, and she was honest enough with herself to admit that the belief was not irrational. It was the assessment of someone who had watched him for 48 hours under conditions that revealed things about people that ordinary circumstances concealed. Sora's hand moved. The fingers spread and curled, that involuntary ancient reflex, and Min-Jae watched it with the expression of a man encountering something that had permanently exceeded his capacity for anything that came before it. She's strong, he said. Yes, Amara said. She's going to be... He stopped. He seemed to not have the word. Everything, Amara said. She's going to be everything. He looked at her then, over Sora's head. The distance between them was the width of a hospital bed, and 9 months of absence, and 2 years of a complicated marriage, and 48 hours of a crisis that had revealed, in the specific way crises revealed things, who they each were when there was nothing left to perform. He looked at her and she looked at him, and neither of them said anything, because the room was already full of the most important thing that had ever been said in it, and it was 6 pounds and 2 ounces, and it was already asleep. Outside, Cho was moving. The evidence was moving. Shin Dae-won in Busan was about to discover that the architecture he had built for 5 years had just been handed to people who dismantled architectures for a living and who could not be leveraged and could not be bought. In Incheon, a lawyer was calling Park Elijah with news that would end permanently whatever calculation Elijah had been running. In 7 apartments across Seoul, 7 women were sleeping without knowing yet that tomorrow someone would contact them with information that would allow them to name what had been done to them. And in a hospital room on the 4th floor of Yongsan Medical Center, a man who had spent his entire life believing that power meant control was holding the first thing he had ever encountered that required him to understand the difference. And he was holding it with both hands, and he was not letting go. The night moved forward. The city moved forward. And the small, sleeping weight of 6 pounds and 2 ounces breathed in and breathed out with the complete authority of something that had just arrived and already knew it belonged. Sora slept through the first hour of her life the way she would come to sleep through most things, completely, with the absolute physical commitment of someone who had decided that whatever she was doing it fully. Her chest rose and fell. Her fists stayed curled. She had opinions about the temperature of the blanket, expressed briefly and then released, and after that she was gone into the particular oblivion of the newly arrived. Min-Jae sat beside the bed with his elbows on his knees and watched her breathe. Amara watched him watch her. She was exhausted in a way that had no ordinary comparison. The specific cellular depletion of a body that had done the hardest thing it knew how to do and was now recalibrating from the inside out. But underneath the exhaustion was something else. Something that was not happiness exactly, because happiness was too clean a word for it. It was more like the feeling of a knot that has been present for so long, you stopped registering it as tension, and now it was gone, and the absence of it was its own distinct sensation. She did not have a word for the absence of a knot you'd stopped knowing was there. She was still thinking about finding one when her phone delivered 3 rapid messages. She read them in sequence. Min-Jae first. Criminal investigation formally opened. Prosecutor's office issued preliminary asset freeze on Shin Dae-won effective midnight. His lawyers filed an emergency appeal, standard procedure, but the evidence package is too comprehensive for a quick reversal. We're solid. Then Cho, to Min-Jae's number, forwarded without comment. 2 cooperating families' evidence submitted. Prosecutor has cross-referenced with our package. Shin's legal team has been notified of expanded scope. He knows it's over. Then the 3rd message. Not from Min-Jae. Not from Cho. From a number she did not have saved, with a Busan area code she did not recognize. 3 lines of text. No greeting, no signature. You were smarter than I expected. Tell Kang he won this round. There won't be another. She read it twice. She read it the way you read something that is trying to sound like a threat and succeeding only in sounding like a man who has run out of actual options. She understood exactly what it was. It was the last thing a person said before the door closed on them. It was the sound of Shin Dae-won understanding that the architecture he had built for 5 years had collapsed in 48 hours, and that the collapse had originated in part with a woman he had treated as a leverage instrument and had miscalculated entirely. She handed the phone to Min-Jae. He read it. He read it again. She watched his face, the old reflex moving through it, the familiar current of a man who responded to threats with the full weight of his organization and his intelligence and his considerable capacity for sustained pressure. She watched it move through him, and she watched him let it pass. He handed the phone back. Forward it to Min-Jae, he said, and to the prosecutor's office. It's evidence of consciousness of guilt. She looked at him. That's all. That's all. She forwarded it. She put the phone face down on the blanket beside her. She looked at Sora, who had not interrupted her sleep for any of this, and felt something that was close to gratitude for the specific oblivion of the newly born. He's finished, Min-Jae said. He was not looking at her. I was looking at the window, at the slice of soul visible through it. Yes. It will take time, the trial, the proceedings. His lawyers will find angles. They always do. Yes. But the network is gone. The architecture doesn't function without the man at the center, and the man at the center is now the subject of a criminal investigation with 3 independent evidence streams and 2 cooperating witnesses. He paused. He knows that. The message was him knowing that. She nodded. And the other women, she said. He was quiet for a moment. The advocacy organization will reach them by morning. The 2 families who already know, their security teams have been briefed on the full picture. They're handling their own situations. The one who didn't respond, she said. She had been thinking about her. The 7th. The one the advocacy organization had not reached. Still working on it. Cho has a secondary contact, a family member, someone not directly caught in the monitoring network. They'll get through. She held that. She had to hold it because the alternative was to carry it as an unresolved weight, and she did not have the physical resources tonight for additional weight. The 7th woman existed. People were working to reach her. That was what was true right now. Okay, she said. She leaned back against the pillow. The machines continued their quiet reporting. Sora's heartbeat on the monitor, steady, indifferent, entirely self-contained. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, Min-Jae said, I'm going to tell you something. You don't have to respond. She was half asleep. She opened her eyes. I was still in the chair, still in the same position, elbows on knees, looking at his hands now instead of the window. The hospital light was the particular flat fluorescent of late-night medical spaces, and it did nothing for anyone's appearance. And he looked in it like a man who had been awake for a very long time and had stopped pretending otherwise. When you left, he said. He said it slowly, choosing words with the precision of someone who understood that imprecision here would be worse than silence. I told myself a story about why, that you hadn't understood what the life was, that you needed more time and more reassurance, and that the problem was information, that if you had more information about the shape of what I was building, you would have stayed. He looked at his hands. It took me approximately 4 months to stop believing that story, and another month to start being honest about what the actual story was. She waited. The actual story was that you understood exactly what the life was. You understood it better than I did, in certain ways. You saw the shape of it from outside the frame I was inside, which meant you could see things I couldn't. And what you saw was that the life I was building had room in it for everything except the kind of space a person needs to be themselves. He paused. I built a life with no room for you. I thought I was building a life for you, and I built one with no room for you in it. And you were correct to leave. Amara looked at him. The hospital was quiet around them. A cart moved past in the corridor outside, wheels on linoleum, receding. I know, she said. I'm not telling you so you'll forgive me. I know that too. I'm telling you because… He stopped. He looked at Sora. Because I don't want to do to her what I did to you. I don't want to build a life around her that has no room for her in it. And I understand now that the way you prevent that is by saying it out loud before the building starts. Not after, before. She looked at him for a long time. She was tired in a way that made long looks feel like physical effort, but she held it anyway because it mattered. What does room look like, she said, in practical terms? What does it look like when you give someone room? He thought about that. She appreciated that he thought about it rather than answering immediately, because immediate answers to that question were almost always wrong. It looks like asking before deciding, he said finally. It looks like being in a room where someone else is speaking and not planning your response while they're still talking. It looks like… He paused again. It looks like what happened tonight. When you told me the filing had to happen before the hospital, I wanted to put you in the car immediately. Every instinct I have said put her in the car, and I gave you the 18 minutes because you told me you needed them and I believed you knew your own situation better than I did. He looked at her. That's what room looks like. Believing the other person knows things you don't and letting that change your decision. She was quiet for a moment. 18 minutes, she said. 18. Not 22. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Almost. The interval was 14 minutes. 18 was already a calculated risk. I'm always counting, he said. I'm trying to learn to count and then let the person who is living in the situation make the call. She looked at him. She did not say anything for a while. She let the silence hold what it was holding, which was something between them that still had no name but was starting to have a shape. Then she said, "Go sleep. There's a sofa in the family room at the end of the hall. Mrs. Han is probably still in the waiting area. Send her home. You can have the sofa." He looked at Sora. I know. Go sleep. You can't be useful to either of us running on nothing. She held his gaze. I'm not sending you away. I'm telling you to sleep so you can come back in the morning and be present. There's a difference. He heard the difference. She saw him hear it. He stood. He looked at Sora one final time. The specific, almost gravitational pull of a new father looking at a sleeping newborn, the way the eyes moved over the face, as if taking an inventory that would need to be updated daily for the rest of his life. Then he looked at Amara. Thank you, he said. She did not ask for what. She understood it was for all of it and none of it specifically, and that it was the only word he currently had for something that was larger than words. Go, she said. He went. She lay in the quiet hospital room with Sora breathing beside her and the city outside the window doing its permanent thing, and she slept. She dreamed nothing. That was its own kind of rest. In the morning, Min-Jae arrived before Min-Jae did, which Amara suspected was deliberate. Min-Jae had a quality of professional protectiveness that expressed itself in timing and positioning rather than overt statement. She came in at 7:30 with coffee and a tablet and the specific compressed energy of a person who had not slept much and was functioning on the kind of sustained focus that sleep deprivation occasionally produced in people who were very good at their work. She sat. She looked at Sora. She said nothing about Sora for a full 30 seconds, which Amara recognized as Min-Jae's version of extended sentiment. Then, Elijah's cooperation agreement was formalized at 6 this morning. His sworn statement runs to 14 pages. He has named Shin explicitly, named 2 intermediaries, and provided documentation of payments received. She set the tablet on the bed so Amara could see the summary. The paternity withdrawal is formally on record as of 6:07. It cannot be reversed without his cooperation, and he has signed a document making that reversal legally costly to the point of impossibility. Amara read the summary. She read the key paragraphs twice. "He knew more than I thought," she said. "He knew almost everything," Min-Jae said. Her voice was level. "He was not a man who was deceived into participating. He understood the mechanism. He agreed to it because his company was failing and he saw a path." A pause. "He also, and this is in the statement, he volunteered it, which his lawyer probably advised against. He also understood it would hurt you specifically. He was aware you were the primary target. He knew that Shin had identified you because of your connection to Min-Jae, and he understood that the paternity claim would be most painful for you because of what you had built in the 6 months since leaving." Min-Jae looked at her steadily. "I thought you should know that directly, rather than finding it in the document." Amara sat with that. She held it the way she had been holding things for the last 48 hours, not suppressing it, not letting it expand beyond its actual dimensions, just holding it and looking at it and letting it be what it was. What it was, Park Elijah had known she was the target. He had agreed to be the weapon. He had done it for money and for the particular small cruelty of a man who had been left and had never forgiven the leaving, and who had found a structure that let him dress that cruelty as a business transaction. She thought about the "I'm sorry" he had sent last night, the single line. She thought about what it cost and what it was worth, and whether those were the same number. They were not the same number, but they were both real. "Okay," she said. Min-Jae looked at her. "That's all? What else is there?" Amara looked at Sora. "He's cooperating. The claim is gone. He's going to live inside what he did for the rest of his life. And I don't have to be the person who enforces that. The law is doing that." She looked back at Min-Jae. "What else is there?" Min-Jae studied her for a moment. Then she nodded once, with the particular economy of a woman who recognized the difference between a person who had processed something and a person who was suppressing it, and had correctly identified which one she was looking at. "Shin," she said, moving on. "The expanded investigation is running. His legal team filed 3 procedural challenges overnight. All 3 were reviewed and denied. The asset freeze holds. He's not going anywhere, not financially and not physically. The prosecutor has filed a travel restriction." She paused. "His message to you last night was entered into evidence this morning. His lawyers are calling it a personal communication with no legal relevance. The prosecutor is calling it a threat and a consciousness of guilt statement. The prosecutor is correct." "How long until trial?" "Optimistically, 18 months. Realistically, 2 years. These things take time," Amara said. "I know. But the network is gone. The monitoring infrastructure, the servers, the investigation firm, the data collection, all of it is under court seal. The families who were targets have been notified through appropriate channels. The prior settlements are being reviewed for potential recovery proceedings. Min-Jae paused. The seventh woman, the one who hadn't responded. Amara straightened slightly. She was reached at 4 this morning by a family member. She's been under monitoring for 3 months. She didn't know. She has legal representation as of 6:30. Min-Jae's voice had something in it that was not quite emotion, but was adjacent to it. She's due in 6 weeks. Amara closed her eyes for a moment. Just a moment. Good, she said. Yes, Min-Jae said. They sat in the quiet of the hospital room for a moment. Sora made a small sound, not distress, just the sound of someone adjusting to the ongoing fact of existence, and then settled again. I need to ask you something, Amara said. Professionally. Min-Jae's posture shifted slightly into its professional register. Ask. Min-Jae's organization, the role it played in this, the server access, the evidence collection. What is the actual legal exposure? Min-Jae considered this with the visible care of someone assembling a precise answer rather than a reassuring one. The evidence was submitted through a confidential tip designation. The prosecutor is treating the source as protected. Whether that protection holds if Shin's lawyers push hard enough. She paused. It depends on the judge eventually, and on whether Min-Jae's organization does anything in the next 18 months that gives Shin's legal team a weapon to use. If his operation stays quiet and clean, the source protection probably holds. If he gives them something to work with, they'll use it to argue the evidence was tainted. He says he's contracting the operation, moving toward legitimate. I know. Min-Jae's tone was careful. People say that. I know people say that, Amara said. I'm watching the evidence. Min-Jae looked at her steadily. That's the right approach. She picked up her tablet. I'll be in touch when the formal case timeline is published, probably within the week. She looked at Sora one more time. The 30-second sentiment allowance, compressed to 15 this time. She looks like she knows things. She's very thorough, Amara said. Min-Jae left. Min-Jae arrived 20 minutes later. He had gone home and changed. The same operational efficiency applied to his personal logistics as to everything else. And he looked like someone who had slept for 4 hours rather than 6, but had made those 4 hours count. He brought food from a place nearby, the kind of practical breakfast that suggested Mrs. Han had provided specific instructions, and he set it on the side table without making it an offering. He sat in the chair. He looked at Sora, who was awake now, conducting her morning research into the ceiling. Min-Jae came, Amara said. I know. I passed her in the elevator. Did she speak to you? She told me the paternity withdrawal was confirmed, and then she walked past me. A pause. Which is approximately what I expected. She's thorough. She's excellent. He said it without qualification. You chose well. Amara ate. He drank coffee. Sora investigated the ceiling with the focused intensity that was already establishing itself as her primary mode of engagement with the world. The seventh woman was reached, Amara said. He looked at her. When? 4 this morning. She's 6 weeks out. He absorbed that. He looked at Sora. Good. Yes. A silence. Not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that had something in it. Some quality of shared weight that had been distributed between two people and was therefore more bearable for each of them. Elijah knew it was me specifically, she said. He's in the statement. He knew I was the primary target. Min-Jae was very still. Min-Jae told me this morning. She kept her voice level. I thought you should know. Did she tell you, Shakes? Everything in the summary. He understood the mechanism. He agreed to it. He knew it would hurt me specifically. She looked at him. He sent the apology anyway, which means some part of him understood what he'd done. I don't know what to do with that. I'm not sure I have to do anything with it. Min-Jae looked at his hands. His jaw moved. She watched the old reflex, the calculation, the assessment of what Park Elijah deserved, move through him again, and she watched him come to the same place he had come to the night before. He's cooperating, Min-Jae said, which means any additional pressure from my direction would compromise the prosecution. Yes, she said, and you don't want additional pressure applied. No, she said. I don't want you to touch him. I want the law to touch him. Those are different things, and I need you to be clear on which one I'm asking for. He looked at her. I'm clear. You're sure? What he did? He stopped. He started again. What he agreed to do, knowing it was you, knowing what it would cost you, that is something I will have a position on for the rest of my life. I want to be honest with you about that. I am not going to pretend I don't have a position on it. He met her eyes. And I'm also telling you that my position on it is not going to become an action, because you asked me not to, and because you're right that the law is the correct instrument here. A pause. Both of those things are true simultaneously. She looked at him. She was looking for the fracture, the place where the commitment cracked and showed the older thing underneath. She didn't find it. What she found instead was the specific, effortful honesty of a person who was telling her something that cost him something to say. Okay, she said. He nodded. Sora had redirected her research from the ceiling to her own hand, which she appeared to find considerably more complex and therefore more interesting. She held the hand in front of her face with the focused incomprehension of someone encountering a new piece of equipment. She's going to be difficult, Min-Jae said. Thorough, Amara corrected. Both, he said. Amara almost smiled. She let it happen, briefly, and then it passed, and they sat in the quiet morning of the hospital room and watched their daughter encounter her own hand for the first time. They discharged Amara 3 days later. The timing aligned, without anyone planning it that way, with the formal public announcement of Shin Dae-won's indictment. It appeared in the financial news first, the asset freeze, the scope of the charges, the cross-jurisdictional nature of the investigation. Then in the general news. Then, by the 3rd day of the hospital stay, in the kind of coverage that came when prosecutors wanted the architecture of a scheme understood by the public before a case went to trial. The monitoring network, the targeting methodology, the use of family court proceedings as financial leverage instruments, 7 identified targets, prior settlements, 5 years of operation. The coverage did not name Amara or any of the other women. The prosecutor's office had sealed the personal identifying information. What the coverage did make clear was the mechanism, how it worked, what it looked like, why it had been invisible for as long as it had. And Amara read it in her hospital bed on the second day with Sora asleep on her chest, and felt something that was close to a particular kind of satisfaction. Not the satisfaction of revenge, the satisfaction of a thing being named, of an invisible machine being made visible so that other people could recognize it if they encountered it. She had contributed to that. Her daughter, in the specific and unrepeatable way of someone who existed and was therefore consequential, had contributed to it without doing anything at all. She sent Min-Jae the coverage link with a single line, "Good." Min-Jae sent back, "Yes." On the morning of discharge, she dressed Sora in the outfit she had bought 3 months ago from a market stall. White, with small printed foxes on the feet, which she had chosen because she liked foxes and had not known at the time about any particular book. She understood, putting it on Sora's feet, that this was the kind of coincidence that became a story, and that it would be told eventually to a girl who would roll her eyes at it and who would also keep it. Min-Jae was in the room when she finished dressing her. He had been in the room for the morning, present at the chair, present at the window, present in the particular way he had developed over 3 days of hospital visits, where present meant available and not hovering. He had learned the distinction faster than she had expected. She tracked that as evidence. He looked at the outfit. "Foxes," he said. "I bought it 3 months ago." He looked at Sora and the foxes. He looked at Amara. "I know," she said. "I know." He sat down. He pressed the heels of his hands briefly against his eyes, a gesture she had never seen from him before, the gesture of a person who is experiencing something their face doesn't have the infrastructure to contain. Then he dropped his hands. He was composed. "Are you ready?" he said. "Yes." "Do you need—" "I have what I need," she said. She had the hospital bag. She had Sora. She had the car seat that Min-Jae had acquired, installed, and had verified by 2 separate automotive safety technicians, which was exactly the kind of thoroughness she had expected from him, applied to exactly the right purpose. "Let's go." They went down in the elevator. Sora was in the car seat, which she had opinions about. She communicated these opinions with brevity and then accepted the situation as a temporary constraint, which Amara recognized as a negotiating style she would need to account for in the years ahead. The car was waiting. Cho was driving. She had her own apartment's address in her head. "Where are we going?" Min-Jae said. He asked it as a genuine question, not a negotiation, not a test. "My apartment," she said. "In Mapogu." He nodded. He told Cho. She looked out the window. The Han River, the gray December light, Seoul doing its thing. "The security arrangement," she said. "Jisoo. Ready when you want her, on your schedule. I'll contact her tomorrow." "All right." She watched the river. She thought about the woman she had been in that clinic waiting room, the borrowed sneakers, the water bottle, the form she had been filling out with a very firm grip on the pen. She thought about looking up and finding the waiting room had been rearranged around a gravitational force she had recognized before she fully processed it. She thought about all the ground between that moment and this one, all the distance, all the cost. She thought about whether it had been worth it and understood almost immediately that worth it was the wrong frame. Things happened. Ground was covered. You arrived somewhere. Whether the somewhere was worth the how you got there was a question that assumed an alternative route existed, and she had lived enough to know that alternative routes were mostly theoretical. You took the route you took, and you arrived where you arrived, and then you decided what to do from there. She was deciding what to do from here. I want to ask you something, she said. Ask? She turned from the window to look at him directly. I was looking at Sora in the car seat between them, doing the daily inventory. Are you happy? She said. He looked up at that. It was not a question she had ever asked him during their marriage. She had not thought to ask it, had assumed happiness was something he calibrated privately, an interior metric that did not require external input. She understood now that was something she had been wrong about. He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. No, he said. Not exactly. She waited. I think I'm at the beginning of something that might become happiness, he said. What I am right now is present, fully present, in a way I don't think I've been in a very long time, maybe ever. He looked at Sora. I spent a lot of years building things outside myself. Structures, organizations, arrangements of power. And I was very rarely inside any of it. I was always at the edge of it, managing it. He looked back at her. Right now I'm not managing anything. I'm just here. And I think that might be what happiness starts from, but I don't know yet because I don't have enough experience with it to identify it by feel. She looked at him for a long moment. That's an honest answer, she said. I'm trying to give you those. I know. She turned back to the window. The city was becoming her neighborhood. The familiar geography of Mapogu, the convenience store, the hairdresser, the corner where the cart vendors set up on dry days. I'm not happy either, not exactly. She said it without apology. I'm somewhere that might become it. I have my daughter and I have my apartment, and the people who are trying to use her are being dismantled by the law, and I have, she paused, I have something I don't have a word for yet. With me, he said. Not a question, just naming the something. Yes. She watched her building come into view. With you? I don't have a word for it. I might not for a while. I know, he said. And you can live with that. I can live with that. He said it without the quality of performing patience. He said it the way people said things they had already decided and were no longer deciding. I'm going to be here. However long it takes to have a word for it, I'm going to be here. The car stopped in front of her building. Cho got out and opened the door on her side. She reached for the car seat handle. Min-Jae reached for the bag. They went up together. 4 flights, which were still 4 flights, which her body registered with the particular exhaustion of a person 3 days postpartum. And she made them slowly, and he did not comment on the pace. She unlocked her apartment. She went in first. The apartment was exactly as she had left it, organized, cleaned by someone who had come during the hospital stay, Mrs. Han's doing by the evidence of the specific order in the kitchen, which had a quality of thoroughness that was recognizable. She had not asked for that. She made a note to address it. The line between help and encroachment required ongoing calibration. She brought Sora to the nursery. She stood in the doorway of the ochre room for a moment, the room she had painted on a step stool, the room with the mobile of paper cranes and the second-hand crib, and the chest of drawers with the wardrobe now standing solid beside it. She put Sora in the crib. Sora made her opinions known about the transition, and then, with the same decisiveness she brought to everything, went to sleep. Amara stood at the edge of the crib and looked at her daughter. Min-Jae stood behind her, not in the room, in the doorway, which was the right instinct. The nursery was Amara's space, established with Amara's hands, and entering it required a different kind of invitation than being in the rest of the apartment. She did not give him that invitation yet. She stood at the crib and looked at her daughter and let everything settle. The case, the evidence. Min-Jae's voice on the phone, Elijah's 14-page statement, the seventh woman, due in 6 weeks, who now knew her name for what had been done to her. Shin Dae-won, frozen in place by the law, about to face the full weight of 5 years of a machine that had just become a matter of public record, all of it settling, all of it finding its permanent place in the past, which was not the same as it being gone, but was the same as it being survivable. She turned around. Min-Jae was in the doorway with his hands in his coat pockets and his face in the particular arrangement it settled into when he was not performing anything and was simply there. She had seen that face more in the last 4 days than she had seen it in 18 months of marriage. She thought about what that meant, and then she thought about it being evidence and filed it as such. "I need you to do something," she said. "Name it. I need you to go home today. Come back tomorrow. Come back the day after." She held his gaze. "I need you to do that as many times as it takes until coming back is the thing that defines you to her, not arriving, not the dramatic entrance, the daily return." He looked at her. She could see him understanding what she was asking, not for distance, not for diminishment, for the ordinary, unremarkable, undramatic thing of showing up, which was harder than arriving, because arriving had the energy of the new, and showing up was just the work itself, repeated. "Yes," he said, "every day." "Every day," he said. She looked at him for a moment longer, then she stepped aside and gestured at the crib. He came into the nursery. He stood at the edge of the crib, on the other side from where she'd been standing, and he looked at Sora. He looked at her with the daily inventory expression that was already becoming familiar, the one that said he was updating his understanding of her in real time and intended to keep updating it indefinitely. Sora slept. Her fists were still curled. The foxes on her feet were slightly askew from the journey. He reached in and straightened one of them, with the one-fingered gentleness he had used on the top of her head in the hospital room. Just the small adjustment. Then he pulled his hand back. He looked at Amara. She looked at him. Between them, the sleeping weight of 6 pounds and 2 ounces breathed in and breathed out with the complete authority of someone who had arrived and already knew what she was, which was the most important person in this room, and possibly in this city, and certainly in the lives of the 2 people standing on either side of her. He left when she asked him to. I went through the door and down the 4 flights and back into Seoul, which received him the way it received everyone, without ceremony, without comment. He would come back tomorrow. She believed that, not because she had decided to believe it uncritically, but because she had watched 4 days of evidence and the evidence pointed that direction, and she was a person who watched the evidence and let it mean what it meant. Amara stood in the ochre nursery of her own apartment, the one she had built from stubbornness and wages, and she listened to her daughter breathe, and outside the window, Seoul continued in its permanent motion, and the case against Shin Dae-won was already in the hands of people who would work it to its conclusion without needing her, and Elijah's cooperation was on record, and the seventh woman knew her name for what had been done to her, and the mobile of paper cranes moved slightly in the current from the heating vent, and everything was as complicated as it had ever been, and nothing was as impossible as it had been 4 days ago. She had spent 6 months being certain she had to survive alone. She understood now that the certainty had been necessary then, had been the thing that got her through, the architecture of a woman who had no other available structure and so built one from will. She did not regret it. She would not have arrived here, in this room, in this life, as this version of herself, without it. But she also understood that the certainty was finished, that what came next required a different architecture, one that included, in its structure, the permanent and non-negotiable weight of the daughter sleeping in the crib, and the man who would come back tomorrow, and the work of deciding every day what she was building and who she was building it for, and whether the building had enough room. She reached up and set the paper cranes moving properly, the way they were meant to move, all of them together, catching the same current, small and handmade, and utterly without pretension about what they were. They moved. She watched them move. Then she went to make coffee in her kitchen, in her apartment, in her ordinary imperfect life, and the door of the nursery stayed open behind her so she could hear if Sora needed anything, and the city pressed its light against her windows, and the day continued.